numbers out there.
All right. Is it weird? I'm trying to read what is written on your T-shirts.
Oh, it's Austin 316. So I don't know if you remember Stone Cold Steve Austin, the famous
I remember
wrestler
Stone
from
Cold.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's a riff on John 316. So it's just he was really popular at the time, and so he had his own verses. He had his own religious verses.
Oh wow! Talk about being a narcissist.
Yes,
All
indeed.
right. So we're talking about Africa and basically bearing the brunt of this global food crisis. Before we go to the food crisis report, though, there's an update from the CBN on domiciliary accounts with regards to withdrawals and deposits. Can you share that update?
Yeah, they released a circular yesterday talking about a bankers committee meeting that they had, and so they wanted to provide more guidance on the foreign exchange, providing more price discovery and more transparency. Basically saying that all visible and invisible transactions or requests, that is your medicals, personal travel allowance, business travel allowance, everything has been collapsed into the investors and exporters window. Banks are to, of course, process your request if you have requests for business travel, personal travel, medicals, and you will get FX at the prevailing rates on the INE window. So the rate at which the investors and exporter window closes, I think it closed at 663 or 660 something on Friday. And so back in the day, of course, we used to get rates at the official rate of 460, but then people were waiting forever. There was no access. They brought out all these funny things. The latest one they brought out was that you needed to have a 3-year tax clearance before you could actually access foreign exchange. All those are just hurdles to let you know that there was not enough foreign exchange. So now, I mean, things not like things have changed overnight, but the price at which you get your foreign exchange is higher, which they think might augment demand a little bit. So also they also said there's no more restrictions on, I think, deposits and withdrawals into domiciliary accounts. This one's a little unclear because at one time you couldn't, I think, withdraw more than $10,000 or so. Now now they've included telegraphic transfers. That's transfers into domiciliary accounts. So they're saying there's no restrictions there, and banks just have to give the CBN information on people who are withdrawing, but more withdrawals on the accounts and deposits. The normal stuff. I mean, if you make a deposit into your account or withdrawal, there's going to be a record of it. So they're just basically trying to give more access, I guess, to FX. But at the end of the day, all that's changed is the rates. The issue of supply is still the main issue for Forex. So hopefully we see more foreign investors coming in and bringing more foreign exchange.
All right. Well, thanks for the update. So let's get to this report. But first off, though, who is the FSIN?
Yeah, it's the Food Security Information Network. They just put out a report, so I think it was just Friday or so, or over the weekend. And they were founded by the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization. I think that's a subset of the United Nations. Also founded by FAO, the World Food Program, and the International Food Policy Research Institute. So they've basically focused on food supplies around the world, and they put out reports like this when it comes to crises that's being faced. So we apparently have a pretty big crisis on our hands right now.
Wow. So what's the big picture, really?
So it's a 213-page report. It's titled "The Global Report on Food Crisis and Joint Analysis for Better Decisions." The issue here is they're saying about 258 million people are facing food crisis across the world. And they're projecting that about that was 2022. They're projecting that about 152 to 154 million people around the world in 2023 will be facing acute food crisis, which refers to insufficient supply of food, basically.
So by how much is Africa impacted?
So there's a map. I wish I could find that map. The report is 213 pages. If I find it, I'll send it to you. There's a global map with color schemes that show you which continents are affected, and Africa is just a blot of colors there. Northern Nigeria, almost all of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Horn of Africa, Eastern Africa being impacted. I mean, Ukraine is impacted because of the war. And I think a couple, South American countries, but Africa, if you look at the map, that's where most of the problems are.
All right, so there's a region in Africa. It's called the IGAD or IGAD. Who are the member states of this region?
Yeah, so it's carved. The IGAD is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. It was carved out of the United Nations. Most of the member states there are 8 of them, and they are mostly in Eastern Africa. So it's Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, and I have to look up a couple other of the countries, but there's 8 of them basically in that particular region, and they have all been impacted disproportionately. Okay, here we go. So it's Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Uganda. Uganda, by the way, just had a nasty terrorist attack that killed at least 25 people in a school just on Friday or Saturday. So those are the 8 states that are members of IGAD.
All right. Well, we're talking about the global food crisis and how Africa is bearing the brunt of it. So if you've got a question, you've got comments, let us know. 0809 444 981. That's the WhatsApp number. And you can also tweet at Smooth981. The hashtag is Business Express 981. And you can also catch the live stream up on our YouTube channel. So coming back to these IGAD countries you've listed, how is this region impacted?
Yeah, so the report is saying about 55.4 million people across that region is being impacted by food insecurity. And they're saying that's for 2022. They are projecting, and that's in about 6 of the 7 states. They didn't have any data for Eritrea. But for 2023, I think they're projecting about 30 to 35 million people will be impacted. So, you have to think about what this number means. 55 million people that's like what? A number of states in Nigeria being impacted. In fact, most of northern Nigeria is impacted as well. But for this region, it's particularly acute. So the numbers are big, 55 million across that region for 2022, 30-something million for 2023. So it's a lot.
So what are the main triggers, though, behind this food crisis?
Yeah, so I mentioned that terrorist attack in Uganda. Of course, you've got, Sudan that's been facing its own armed conflict with warlords that have been fighting. You've got issues in Democratic Republic of Congo. I think the border between them and Kigali. Yeah, and then you've got our own conflicts in northern Nigeria. The 3 main triggers are armed conflicts, so basically war. Then second is economic shocks, and then third is climate impacts, so climate change, droughts, pests and so on and so forth. So those 3 pests are really climate. Climate is more drought, lack of water, and then you've got flooding. That's the middle belt of Nigeria that was impacted by flooding, for example. So those are the main triggers: armed conflict, economic shocks like the COVID pandemic and the shutdowns, and then climate.
So how can this crisis be resolved?
So Antonio Gutierrez, the United Nations Secretary General, said that they have data on the most affected regions. They know what the triggers are, and the issue is trying to depress those triggers. So, one, on the armed conflict, they're saying that they need more. There's a peace mission, I think, of African leaders that went to Russia to go talk to Putin and Zelensky about ending the war, because if you think about wheat exports and how much Nigeria, Egypt, and other countries depend on wheat, the African continent is disproportionately affected by that. So for in their own interest, just to get more wheat, which is flour, bread, and all that stuff, as far as the derivatives, they want the war to end. So it's more, the report is calling for more peace missions Sudan would say there was a ceasefire, and then there wasn't a ceasefire. There's all these issues with trying to get these conflicts to end. For the economic shocks, that one, we talk about that a lot. These countries have to try to reduce debt, because debt is impacting a lot of these African countries to where they're not able to pump money towards more sustainable measures to try to produce more food. So reducing debt, freeing up more capital to invest more in food, investing more in food production, infrastructure. We look at a lot of these African countries are very dependent on imports. For example, the African leaders that went to Russia and Ukraine because of the impact on wheat. If you could grow more of your own stuff, you wouldn't have to be impacted by that. And then on climate, more focus on renewables, less of a focus on fossil fuels, which is hard because Nigeria, for example, depends so much on oil. In South Africa, depends so much on coal. These are quote unquote dirty fuels, but those are the things that they've said. You've got to try to itemize those three items, itemize those three triggers, and bring them down. Easier said than done, as the
right. But do you think we'll ever get to a point where Africa could be self-sufficient?
We can, but there's just so many distractions that are hitting the continent. And, you've got corruption, you've got people stealing money that in governments that should be used for producing more food. You've got lack of power. You've got lack of technology to get out more yield per hectare from your land. So it can be done, but we've got to get all these roadblocks out of our way in order to be able to produce more food, to allow us to be food sufficient. There's a there's a rice guy. As I got introduced to somebody who produces rice in one of the regions, his own rice. He's an economist and he went into farming. Hopefully I'll get him on Business Express and also the marketplace to talk about food sufficiency for us here in Nigeria. So we'll have more food. It's an important topic. So we'll talk more about it as the weeks go by.
Brilliant. All right. Well, that is all the time that we have for Business Express this morning. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Rotus, as always, for a great show.
Thanks so much, Zibby. I'll catch you guys tomorrow.
Do stay with us. There is a lot more to come on the Smooth Breakfast.